to me is a very perfect place to live in many respects. And that's a remarkable achievement, I think. I believe I'm living in the future when I live in Singapore, and that's to me one of the great appeals of living here.
Meet John Sharp, a serial entrepreneur, venture investor and multi-millionaire who grew up in Australia, moved to the US and has been living in Singapore since 1993. He shared why Singapore, Dubai and Miami are the main cities of the world, what young Singaporeans don't understand about their country, and who the real-life crazy rich Asians are. I'm Max, an entrepreneur and YouTuber based in Singapore. Let's go.
I think one of the interesting things about Singapore is its consistency. It doesn't seem to matter how big it gets or how modern it gets or whatever, it's still Singapore. I imagine Singapore probably hasn't changed in terms of the core Singaporean that you meet in the street for probably 100 years. So it still feels, it's always felt like the same way to me. It's never felt like a completely different place. It's got its own character, it's got its own kind of vibe, and that seems to have stayed fairly consistent.
So apart of basically infrastructure, any other changes that after so many years you notice in the place?
I think in the 80s it was like more of a sort of free and easy kind of place, and then when it went through a less sort of free and easy stage, and then it came back to a sort of free and easy stage. It's like a lot of places, it kind of flexes, and in terms of how far it's willing to go in one direction or another direction. Yeah, just for an example, there's a lot of content on TV now that you see in Singapore that's just fine, but it probably wouldn't have shown up in the 90s. There would have been a lot more cuts in it, censorship and whatnot. So I think there's more of a relaxed view to what you can see and read these days, which is a good thing. I mean, that's definitely, but I suspect it might have been like that in the early 80s as well. So I think it sort of goes up and down a little bit, like many places.
So it was like more stricter, more tougher in the 90s.
I think so. Yeah, but that has its own charm. We used to go down to the Blue Moon Cafe just off Orchard Road and buy Rolling Stone magazine. We used to go to Jason's Grocers and buy Vegemite, which wasn't available sort of anywhere else. Yeah, so we just came back from Indonesia, and Indonesia today is a bit like Singapore was then, in that you can't always find what you want, the grocery stores. And in Singapore now you can find anything anywhere. It's amazing. And in Indonesia, it's a bit like Singapore was in the 90s, where if you saw something you really needed, like a bottle of your favorite wine or spread, you'd pick up like a whole bunch of that while you were there,
What people outside of Singapore don't understand about the place?
What I notice that people don't understand about the place is how much we're living in the future. People always like dividing the world into the developing world and the non-developed world. I think that's rubbish. I think you need to really think about what the world is going to be like 100 years from now and how close you are to that version of the world. And I think if you look at Singapore and how close it is to the version of the world that we will have to be living in 100 years from now, all things being equal, in Singapore, it's possible for you to own your own home, almost guaranteed a job. There's very low unemployment, live in a place where there's an excellent tax structure, and the taxes that you do pay are reflected in the infrastructure and everything else that you see around you. So unlike so many other economies in the world, this represents in many ways perfection, that perfected the model. It's just on a very small scale. And so now the question, I think, for a lot of us is how much can this model scale to encompass the rest of the world? Like, will it just stay in places like Singapore and Dubai and a handful of places, or will they be able to actually take this model and scale it? But this to me is a very perfect place to live in many respects. Just as a typical average member of the community here, you're doing much better, I think, than the average member of a community almost anywhere else in the world. And that's a remarkable achievement, I think. I believe I'm living in the future when I live in Singapore, and that's, to me, one of the great appeals of living here.
Sometimes I think people like Singaporeans, they don't quite understand that how well they live.
Yes. I have this argument all the time with taxi drivers, particularly young taxi drivers. The old guys get it because they know where they've come from. Yeah, they know what they had. Like if you meet some 70-year-old taxi driver, it's always a delight for me to speak to those guys because they've seen the whole cycle. They've seen the whole development. But the young guys like, oh, this and that, and they'll get a bit grumpy. And I'm like, you don't understand, how good you've got it. Yeah, you need to go to here, here, and here, and here and reflect that you're living in a place that's so safe, in which you have almost endless opportunities to get the best passport in the world, fantastic education, you can travel anywhere, you're respected anywhere as a Singaporean. So these are incredible benefits, I think, but the old guys get it, quite a lot of the young people get it, particularly ones that have traveled, but I'm not sure they fully appreciate how awesome it is to be able to rock up at age 28 with a brand new wife or husband, get an apartment, get everything you need and have everything in life handed to you with no natural disasters, no security issues, no wars pending. I mean, this is, stable currency. These are remarkable things, especially in the context of when you travel a little bit and you see how lacking many other places are in those basic needs.
I guess it helps, like, if you start traveling. The best one, I think, to spend like some substantial amount of time somewhere else, like not for a tourist, but like to live in places, at least like traveling.
100%. I think it's so important because if you don't travel, you don't see the non-movie side of a country. Your home country, Russia, right? A lot of people have seen Russia through the eyes of Die Hard movies where they're always shot in winter and it's always like dark and grey and whatnot. The only time I've ever been to Russia, I went there to Skokovo, to one of the startup festivals there, and it was springtime. There's flowers everywhere and everyone's out in the streets having dinner outdoors, and it was absolutely glorious and beautiful and light and lovely. And so you contrast that with the way that the country is typically depicted in films, and they're obviously looking for dramatic purpose. And I think one of the fascinating things about Crazy Rich Asians was how well it typified a certain side of Singapore that I think most people in the West had no idea existed. This incredibly bling, crazy rich side of what goes on here or Hong Kong or other parts of the world. And in its own way, very modern sort of, way, very wealthy, very luxury focused and all the rest of it. I think there's a lot to say about traveling, because particularly if you travel here and you go out to food courts and you go to places that are not touristy but are more in the heartlands, I think you're going to see an entirely different thing than you would normally see as a tourist. The blogs I like are the guys that go off the beaten tracks and go out the middle of nowhere and see what things are really like. And I think if people take the time to do that here, they'll see a different side to Singapore than just the touristy side.
Would you imagine yourself living, like, let's say right now, living in Australia or in the US with your family?
In Australia, the tax system is entirely broken, and no one has the guts to come out and say it. It's horrible. For anyone, the housing market there is entirely broken. If you're a young person in Australia or Canada, my wife's Canadian, so we see a lot of both these countries and they're quite similar. If you're a young person in Australia or Canada, good luck getting a house. It's going to be very, very difficult. Or good luck just getting on and accumulating wealth. Very difficult than the tax systems in both those countries. In the US, better tax system, easier to accumulate wealth, but very unsafe. It feels unsafe. It feels like people can pop out with a gun and kill you. In Singapore, great tax system, no security issues, great quality of life. And so comparable to Australia's an awesome quality of life, but you really pay for it with the taxes. And in America, pretty good quality of life, but I think the health system here is better. I think the tax system here is better, and I think the quality of life and quality of food here is better.
So you wouldn't move from Singapore anywhere?
The only place I'd actually consider moving to is Dubai. The thing I love about Dubai is you get there and you feel like they're promoting a vision and a purpose constantly. So if you're a young person in Dubai, you feel like you're part of something. In some ways, it's quite similar to what I saw here in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. In Singapore, there's always, particularly when Old Man Lee was in charge, there was always a, we're striving to do this kind of thing. And I think that's still very much part of the Dubai story, is we're striving to do this. And Singapore, it's hard to figure out where you'd strive to be because you're kind of there. You've, in some ways, so many ways, Singapore has arrived. As I mentioned, I think it's the city of the future. So it's achieved so much that it's very hard to sort of put a vision out there that says, well, we're going to achieve this much more because it's done so well. In Dubai, it's still possible to believe that you can go from here to here. In Saudi, most certainly so. And so what I enjoy is that energy of being part of something that can go from here to here. But I particularly enjoy, there's this same sense that government is there for the community it serves. Those two things are common to Singapore and Dubai, and they're not common to many other parts of the world. You ask most people, they'll think, well, we're here to serve the government, we're here to pay all our taxes. Singapore is the reverse. The government works for the community. In Dubai, the government or the sovereign works for the community, and that's obvious in both places. You're not being forced to pay very much tax. You're enjoying a very high quality of infrastructure and a good quality of life and security. So I like that. I like governments that are in service to their communities. That's a big appeal for me in both those places. And I've generally find Dubai a fun place with a super high quality of service. Like they go to restaurants in Italy and they find the best maitre d' they can find and bring him to Dubai with the promise of not paying any tax or paying very little and doubling your salary. It's very hard for people to resist that in the service business. So I do think Dubai has Singapore beat on service quality simply because they use those weapons very well to bring them into town, and they really do value quality of service in the hospitality industry. And that's because it's so important to Dubai's economy that they get that right. And so I find the quality of service slightly better there in hospitality sense. But other than that, both places are vibrant, extraordinary places to live. So that's where I'd live. If I couldn't live here, I'd go there. And I think that there are 3 emerging hub cities in the world: Singapore, Dubai, Miami. So basically, Dubai has a lock on Africa. The joke was, it was for a long time, it was the richest state in India. I'm not sure that's true anymore. I think there's a few states in India that have overtaken that. Dubai is really a focal point for people from India, Pakistan, the Middle East generally, and Africa. So it's like a hub city. But Singapore is a focal point for people from Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan. So India. Right, so India is kind of shared between Dubai and Singapore. So I think Singapore is a hub city. Miami, Latin America. I just saw Sean Hannity just announced he's moving from New York to Miami. He's joining a long list of people that are moving in that direction. Miami is going to be a hub city for the Americas, for Central America, for the Caribbean, for Latin American families and wealthy families, and for people sick and tired of the weather in the Northeast. So I think you have those 3 cities, and each of those has extremely big markets that they can serve. Miami's got all of Canada and Mexico and America and Latin America. Dubai, all of Africa, a lot of Europe that spend their summers there and put capital there. And Singapore has a third, 2/3 of the world. So nothing to worry about for Singapore. I think there's plenty of folks to service out here. And people forget things, like they forget how big Indonesia is. Like Indonesia is almost as big as America, right? It's right on our doorstep. So there's, and China, India. I mean, we've got a powerful amount of people just sitting in our backyard. So I don't think Singapore's in any danger of losing out to Dubai, except for a small percentage of stuff.
Hey guys, quick announcement. I know some of you are inspired of my journey on YouTube, and if you ever want to start your YouTube channel to attract clients to your business, or just to share your knowledge, expertise, or creativity with the world, make a side hustle business out of it, then you might want to check my free webinar about it. Link down below. So book your seat. And now back to the video.
You mentioned the famous movie Crazy Rich Asians. Due to your professional career, you probably know also this world, like of Crazy Rich Asians in Singapore, let's say. What's the difference in the movie and the real life?
I've been to some pretty extravagant weddings, but I don't think I've ever been to a wedding quite that extravagant. So that was definitely pretty crazy. But I actually think everything's accentuated for the purposes of drama. But I think we've all met people that have the same qualities as folks that are in that that are in that movie. And I think the movie tells a timeless story, of the girl with a single mom who comes from a poor family and marries the rich guy. So I think that's kind of like that's a cross-culture story, which is probably why the film was so successful. But I thought it did an excellent job of showing a lot of different aspects of Singapore. I mean, is it the Singapore that most people live in? No, but it's Crazy Rich Asians. I'll tell you, one thing I would say is that most wealthy people I know, they don't go out of their way to show it. I don't see that a lot. Either here, I don't see it a lot in the Middle East. You'll see new wealth. You'll see people that are recently rich sort of, go and show some bling. But as a general rule, one thing I love here is I'll occasionally meet people that you wouldn't think that they've got any money at all, and they turn out to be unbelievably wealthy, but they've just chosen not to accentuate that or to... I met a guy in the Middle East recently. I had no idea that he is wealthy at all, very humble kind of guy. Found out after meeting him 3 or 4 times at various events and then sitting down to dinner with him and his dad, he's worth $4 billion. There's nothing about his dress, his manner, anything else that indicated that he was worth that amount of money. And they kept it very quiet. And I think partly that's for security purposes. for some families. But I think it's two sets of people. And there's people that want to seem to be more wealthy or want to be known to be more wealthy than they probably are. And there's people that highly desire to be not known at all or not have anything known about how wealthy they are. So I think, and there's probably a couple of people right here that are happy for people to know exactly how wealthy they are. And I think the one thing I'd say about Asians is, as a general rule, they don't show off. Middle East maybe a little bit more, but I kind of like that. I like the fact that people are still attempting to fit in with their community by not being too crazy ostentatious. So maybe that's one thing the movie overemphasizes. And also that there's this kind of myth, I think, that exists that a lot of wealthy people don't work hard for their money. From what I've seen, having met a lot of wealthy people, that is total BS. Most of the wealthy people that I've ever met have worked extremely hard to get where they are, continue to work extremely hard even when they're there. And very few of them are driven by money per se. Almost every wealthy person I've ever met was driven by deep curiosity or some other drive to do something that created that wealth. And because the wealth is there doesn't mean that the drive suddenly disappears. They still have this drive to make money for their family, or because they're deeply interested in some scientific curiosity or how some business process works. And so that never goes away. For Mark Zuckerberg, right? He's never lost his curiosity, obviously, for what goes on inside, a social network. He's never lost that curiosity for business. And so he continues to do it. Elon's obviously a hugely curious guy, very, very driven. Bezos, the same. These guys are just they're not driven by money. I mean, who needs more than $100 billion? Nobody.
What are the other common traits that you notice, common features of people, wealthy people here in the region that you notice?
Family focused. I think most people, like I go to a lot of family office events, have for years. I've noticed that increasingly I noticed there's an emphasis in these family office events on passing along the wealth. And I saw someone interviewed the other day, and they said, the interview said, will you be passing along to your wealth to your son and daughter? He said, of course. And they said, you're not of this philosophy that you shouldn't do that so that they become self-made man. He said, no, I'm of the philosophy that I don't want to be hated as a parent. He said, so if I don't give them at least some of my wealth, they're going to hate me and think I'm some kind of miser and selfish person. So he said, of course I have to pass some of this along. And I think practically speaking, that's what all wealthy people understand. And so then what you want is you don't want your inheritance to be used for bad things or for non-productive things. So then it becomes a lot of emphasis on how you educate your kids to be money smart, to understand how to invest, to understand how to treat people. And I do see a lot of emphasis on that with some of the folks that I meet. The truly wealthy people of this world know how to treat everyone really well. It's the new money that treats people badly and orders the servants about and pretends to be whatever the hell comic book hero Bond villain they think they are. But I found most multi-generational wealthy people be pretty nice, pretty family-oriented, hardworking, as a general rule. Not everybody, but certainly as a general rule, I think that's the case. And not that interested in showing it off. There's something else in there that's driving them, family, curiosity. It's not Scrooge McDuck accumulation of gold coins and paintings.
Do you think the tough, the kind of managing people, they're more like the good guys or they're more like the bad guys?
I think they're capable of giving criticism when it's warranted. But you read this, and we've all read all these biographies of people that had a bullying approach. I certainly think if you're an impatient person, the bully will creep out of you from time to time, and you will get caught bullying someone into doing something faster or attempting to do that because it's a shortcut. So I think we can all fall victim to that mentality. But as a general rule, if you find someone, like if you're managing $1 billion family office and you have someone, if you own $1 billion family office, if that's your family, and you have someone that's a trusted person that's managing that's kind of like the managing director or CEO of that office, and they've been writing checks in your name for 10 years, you have to really look after that guy. You have to make sure that they get wealthy too. You have to make sure that there's no incentive for them to dislike you and do things that would otherwise mess with you and the generations after you. I think there's a huge incentive to look after people in that wealth management area, because there's a huge incentive not to do the other thing. It's very important. But I think as a general rule, if you grow up in a good family, you're taught to respect people, to say please and thank you, to recognize when good things are done to you that you should remember who did them, pass things forward. These are things that you're taught in a good family. And if you're not taught them in a good family, but you realize them in your own life, then it's your responsibility to teach them to the next generation. Because that's a guarantee, I think, of success. If you're nice to people, if you're well-mannered, and you're a good member of society, I think that's just a basic good rule. I don't see a lot of successful people that are bullies or angry assholes. I don't think they exist, but a handful of them. And I think they generally get away with that because they're either unbelievably smart or unbelievably multifaceted, good in a multifaceted way. But I'm kind of glad those guys don't always win, because I think it's better when you see people that quietly get on with it, that are curious people that just work hard and have success based on their ability to build a team of really good people.
Do you remember the moments in your life when you said to yourself, I made it. I made life, like, financially, let's say?
Yeah, I remember I started in Singapore in 1993 with 3 other good buddies. I started a music television channel to compete with MTV, and we added a karaoke function. We called it Channel KTV. My wife was head of programming. My 3 buddies were involved in the business as directors. We raised $20 million through a good buddy of mine, Andrew Cressati in Florida, and we got it up and running. And we sold it 2 years later, and we made a bunch of money, and that was the first time that I'd ever had spare money in the bank.
How old are you?
34 or something at the time, and so that was the first payday. And I remember taking my file box home from the office after I'd sold it, and the new guy'd come in as CEO, thinking that's it, I can retire. Not really, but but thinking that I've now got some play money and I can sort of sit back. And I lasted 10 days. I actually bought, this is disgraceful, but I bought a pair of Gucci loafers and a bunch of novels, and I went and sat by the pool because I thought that's what retired people did. And I lasted like a few days.
What was the most amount of money you received, like in one check, in one go, like to your bank account?
I'd rather not say. It's going to sound obnoxious. Yeah.
It's like in millions or in 10?
In
millions.
Yeah.
What was the feeling when you see it? You open the app or like the web browser?
Yeah, it's. Do you know what's funny is there's a weird thing that happens when you put money into your bank account, a decent sized check into your bank account. You then start, as you move on to the next venture, you're of course bleeding money out to feed that next venture, and so as it starts bleeding down, you then become very focused on how much is going out, and that becomes a source of anxiety. So it's a momentary thing when you have like a decent sized number in your bank account. Yes, there's a moment of happiness, but then there's the anxiety about, well, I'm not bringing in any capital, other than interest, but I'm not bringing in anything on top of that, and I've got the rest of my life to live. And so, if you're 40 years old and that happens to you, you've probably still got another 40, 50 years on the planet. You can do the sums, and you're not going to survive just on that. And so at that point, then it becomes an anxious thing every time you're drawing it out of the account. So I'm not entirely sure that there's anyone that I know that even has a bunch of money in their bank account that doesn't think about it and have that same level of anxiety about making wrong decisions or what they do in the future. There's very few people I can think of that are just free and easy. There's maybe 2 guys off the top of my head I can think of that just live the life and don't care about anything and have no desire to go back into business or anything else. But everyone else I know, despite the money they have in the bank, is still working pretty hard.
Do you think that entrepreneurship is for everyone?
No. And the reason you know that is if you manage a bunch of people like I do, and you go to them with stock options and you explain what the stock options are, and they say, well, can I have a pay rise instead? That person's not an entrepreneur. They're more interested in cash now than wealth later. So that's always an indicator for me. But I also think everyone's not everyone's a storyteller, and not everyone has a burning desire to do something. And I sometimes envy those people because They have like an easier life. And I sometimes wonder, is it when you see someone just happily sitting on the beach at 45 years old and just chilling, and they're doing that every day, maybe they've got it figured out and the rest of us haven't.
Speaking about meaning of life, what's the meaning of life there?
The only way we achieve immortality is through our children. So it's super important that we look after them and do the best to bring them up, but we can't be helicopter parents either. We've got to let them create their own personalities and run their own lives. So I think families and children are enormously important. I think our wives give up a lot to I think it's much tougher being a woman having kids than it is men, both physically and 100 other ways. Yeah, I think the meaning of life is the meaning of human life, and probably animal life as well, is to propagate. Actually, the meaning of all life is we need to propagate and have life, and maybe create the conditions for that life to be better than our own life. And the rest of it is window dressing. I think it's fun, it's enjoyable. If you're a curious person, it's all very interesting. I think the core reason that we exist is to create families and then have them go on and hopefully have a better quality of life. If that sounds really old-fashioned, my apologies, but that's I think that's the basic.
We also discuss it with let's say friends. I have 2 children and I really love them, and I kind of try to explain myself why they matters to me. And it seems like it's kind of natural thing for human beings, like to love your children without particular,
100%.
Meaning to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Even when they're doing stuff that you distinctly do not love them doing, you're still loving them, and it's a wonderful thing. I think that the love that you get and that you give your kids is a different kind of love than you have with your spouse or with your partner, and it's irreplaceable. I mean, a lot of people say it's the same as the love they have that their pets give them as well, and I think there's something to that. I think this sort of thing where you've got this unconditional sort of like reliance on each other is pretty nice.
Can I ask how old are you?
Yeah, 63.
How does it feel to be 63?
Pretty awesome. I feel exactly the same as I did when I'm 23. Honestly, it's I gave up drinking 12 months ago. Highly recommend that for anyone over 50. It improves your life and your health immeasurably. It's quality of sleep, everything. So if you're watching this video still to this point and you take away one thing, that's something I never ever in my life would have thought I'd ever recommend. But I'm super glad that I did that, and I'm not going back. That's it for me. But yeah, being 63, I do think you get a little less grumpy, a little less quick to temper, a little happier, hopefully, and a little more relaxed and a little wiser. I do think you do learn stuff that does aggregate as you go along. You do eventually get a clue, which is good for anyone out there that's like 43 and not there's still 20 years to go to get there. I feel like things have gotten better for me the closer I get to the age that I'm at now. And the other thing I would say is I started this business 4 years ago, like 59. I went back and did database architecture and learned all about that 12 years ago from a zero sort of standing point. I think you're never too old to learn new skills, and the older you wait to learn them, the more modern those skills will be. So that's a weird thing. So I actually have a more up-to-date understanding of some of the code bases that are out there than people that went to school 20 years ago, but are 30 years younger than me, which is kind of interesting. I think as an older person, you should never not take the chance to learn a new language or learn a new skill set, because you may find just that elevates your understanding of what's happening in the world and also your ability to participate in it.
If you want to hear more stories of inspirational, fun and impactful people, watch the next video. I promise you will enjoy it. No, seriously, you will.